So I love horror. I love all forms of horror, horror music, horror movies, horror video games. I'm actually really well known for my ability to handle horror in VR very well.
I'm not kidding.
And I won't let anybody challenge me on that one. So, yeah, sorry about that. But anyway, I want to talk today a little bit about horror books, horror novels, because I find horror literature very, very interesting. I actually just barely started reading horror literature at the start of this year. I'd read a couple of spooky things in the past, like Coraline, but I wanted to get kind of fully into what is horror literature, what is horror media, what is it all about, what can I read, what can really spook me out. And so the start of my journey actually was with Clive Barker's The Hellbound Heart right here. Now, The Hellbound Heart is what the movie Hellraiser is based off of, and I've seen Hellraiser before, really awesome movie. The Hellbound Heart is the book version of it that I think does a really good job of being really creepy and, being a freaky, scary book about evil sex BDSM demons. So I really like The Hellbound Heart. It is interesting because it is written by Clive Barker, who also directed the movie and wrote the movie. I actually think the movie does some stuff story-wise a little bit better, but it is a great little horror book if you're looking for a small one to read. I would definitely recommend The Hellbound Heart. I really, really love that book. Another book that I read right after that one that I found super interesting, again, based off of a horror movie was based off of this, is The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. Now, this is going to be my go-to recommendation for anybody who's interested in horror, especially horror novels, because I think The Exorcist as a book is phenomenal. The movie is also very, very good. I love The Exorcist movie. I think it's totally creepy, has some amazing acting, some of the most amazing practical effects you'll ever see. But in my mind, it does not really hold a candle to the book. The book has a lot more of the priest, one of the two priests that eventually performs exorcism, talking all about that priest's struggle with their faith, with not really believing in God anymore, despite the fact that they are a Catholic priest, Jesuit priest. And I think that story in and of itself is incredibly interesting. The Exorcist is always an easy recommendation for me. Again, it's another one where the person that wrote it, William Peter Blatty, was also the person that wrote the screenplay for The Exorcist. And that's what made that movie so good. There's actually a sequel to The Exorcist called Legion. I don't have it here on me right now. That's another one I definitely recommend. It's what The Exorcist 3 is based off of, which is a great horror movie. So I'd watch The Exorcist 3 if I were you. But The Exorcist is going to be a definite recommendation for me when it comes to horror. I think it's like nearly perfect. It is kind of brutal because if you know the story of The Exorcist, and I won't really spoil a whole ton here, it deals with a little girl who has been possessed. And starting the book, you'll hear all about the relationship between that girl and her mother, and it's very sweet, and you know exactly where it's going, so it's a little bit heartbreaking. Another great horror classic here that just fell down is Stephen King's Carrie. So Stephen King is kind of like the master of horror, a lot of people call him. I don't read a lot of Stephen King because I feel like I typically find his style to be kind of dry. I'm definitely going to revisit more of his stuff now, though, because I really, really loved Carrie. Carrie is about a girl with psychic powers who is constantly bullied. She has a really hyper-religious Christian mother who abuses her, and Carrie kind of has a warped view of the world when it comes to maybe her own growing up and sexuality and what it means to be a girl. And so it is a really great example of just like horror told through the experience of womanhood, which is interesting because it's written by Stephen King, and I'm usually not a big fan of when male authors try to write female characters. I think they don't work out very well. Something's always kind of weird about it, but Stephen King does a pretty good job of it in this book. The book is also framed really interesting because it's all about this girl, Carrie, but interjected in between different chapters, you have these different like accounts from like newspapers or books about the Carrie incident that happens. So something that happens at the end of the book. And so you kind of get this framing narrative of like something bad happens, we're going to find out what the reason was behind it. And then you end up finding out what exactly bad happened and the events that led to that. So I really love Carrie. I think it was a great book. It's not very long. It looks kind of thick here, but it's very small pages. This is definitely an easy recommendation. And then for the last book I want to talk about today, I'm going to bring up Adam Neville's Last Days, because this is a very interesting case when it comes to horror. So this is a big boy, a big old book. I bought this because I had heard Adam Neville was a good horror writer. He wrote a book called The Ritual that was turned into a Netflix movie a couple years back. I really liked that Netflix movie. So I was going to buy Ritual, but then I was like, I don't want to just read something that I've already know the story about. So I bought Last Days instead. And Last Days is interesting. It's like a found footage horror book. So it's about a crew of a couple guys that go out and are trying to do some investigative research and reporting about a cult that was headed by a lady. And they end up stumbling upon some pretty horrifying stuff. You find out more about what the cult was about, what they all did, and then just like understanding like where the cult had their operations, and you end up finding out the characters are being stalked by maybe some lingering presence that the cult still has. And I found this book to be like incredibly gripping and interesting for the first like 80% of it. The first 80% is like this incredibly gripping and interesting mystery about what this cult was. You find out more about what they did, what their practices were, who their old members were, and it's all super, super interesting. And I was like loving it. You get to one point where it tells you about kind of the very beginning origins of the cult, and at one point you see these, you don't see them, but the main character is shown these paintings that describe kind of the history of what happened with this particular group. And it was like the creepiest, most unnerving thing I've read in my entire life. And then like the last 20% of it devolves into what feels like a Resident Evil fan fiction. I don't want to be mean to Adam Neville because he is a really great writer, but what makes this book frustrating is that he is such a great writer. Then the last 20% of it introduces this like gun-toting American character who's like a total cartoon action hero, and it just becomes this dumb, like raiding this particular place, and it's all this action that plays out, and there's bullets flying everywhere, and it just gets, it turns so dumb, which I was really disappointed about because the first 80% of this book is really some of the best horror I've ever read. And that's not uncommon when it comes to horror novels. I would say a lot of them struggle with the ending because you don't want to give away too much or show too much, but you also want to leave some sort of satisfying conclusion. This book, unfortunately, I think had a decent conclusion and then just kept going, and it would have been a lot better for not doing that. So I would honestly recommend reading Adam Neville's The Last Days because I do think it is a very interesting book, and it's really good in the beginning, and the end, while not being very good, is just interesting in the way that it kind of weirdly falls apart near the end. But definitely not at the top of my list of horror novels. Well, anyways, this was kind of a shorter video, just me talking about some horror literature that I really like. But I would really encourage you, if you're somebody who's interested in horror but maybe doesn't like watching horror movies, maybe you don't like the blood and guts and all that stuff, I would really take a look at some horror literature. Like I said, The Exorcist is a pretty great one. So is Stephen King's Carrie. If you're looking for something a little bit less spooky, then I would read something like Coraline or Clive Barker's The Thief of Always, which isn't really a horror. It's more of a dark fantasy. But those are some awesome, great horror books for you to read. I really love horror as a genre. I think it allows us to dive into our deepest fears, which allows for just a ton of emotion to be present in the writing. I think horror literature is just like awesome because it's this masterclass in building suspense through very little, just through words. And so I think anybody, no matter what you want to write, if you're somebody who's interested in writing something or just understanding a little bit more about how writing works, then I really think you should read some horror literature because it always is a very great example of building kind of very vivid image pictures, vivid imaginations of these horrifying, scary things that are happening, and just doing it all through words. So I really love horror literature. I would really encourage you to go read some more of it because I think it's really awesome. And then just to wrap up here, if you don't know, the show is called The Daily Davis. So I do a video every day. I might slow that down just a little bit, but I typically talk about ADHD or something else I'm interested in. So we talked about horror literature today. I'm sure it'll be something different tomorrow, but if you liked the video, if you like this kind of stuff, then please subscribe to me. I'm still kind of trying to figure out what I want this channel to be, but we're at 289 subscribers right now, so we're almost at 300, which is really exciting. And if you're somebody who's been subscribed and you're watching my stuff, then thank you so much. I love making these videos. I love getting to know people, so I thank you guys so much for just supporting me. It's really awesome. But anyway, yeah, that's it for me. Please go read some horror literature, and I will see you guys later. Bye.